Hey Duck fans! It's been a while. In my hiatus, I have had time to put together some fun new thoughts and ideas for future videos, but this month I'm covering a topic I promised to some time ago. My personal opinions and thoughts on the new Ducktales, or Ducktales 2017. Let me preface this with a short note. This video is being recorded off script. I am going off script because I feel like if I try to structure my thoughts, I'm going to cut a lot out. And I know I would want to cut a lot out because my opinion is primarily negative. I honestly try to be a little more fair. I try to play more of a devil's advocate when I have opinions for certain things, but with this show, I just find 95% of my feelings are negative. Now, I also want to note before I really start to nitpick, I have a bias concerning this show because I grew up with the original. I'm also a fan of Carl Barks and Don Rosa and some other comic writers, but I don't know much about the Brazilian or Italian or really any overseas comic writers or those specific characters or those character arcs. I'm American, and I have some difficulty finding translated issues of those comics, so if I don't recognize something in the new show that is an Easter egg or a reference to something from one of those comics, and I just don't get it, I apologize. I will eventually. I do plan on trying to find translated issues of the other comics. There's so much more Donald Duck media overseas, and I would love to get my hands on it. It's just kind of slow going for me. Now, the show. One of my main complaints is I don't like the new characterizations of established characters. I don't like this Scrooge. I don't like this Beakley or Launchpad or Gyro or Miss Quackfaster or virtually any of the villains. I understand they're different because there needs to be a separation from the original show and the remake to easily differentiate the two. However, this leads to poor facsimiles of well-loved characters. Scrooge is now an unpleasant, jaded old duck whose main defining feature seems to be his cavalier dismissal of basically everyone. I hate what they've done with Gyro. I understand how some fans can see and appreciate him being depicted as more of a stodgy introvert because he's usually invested more in his inventions and research than he is with forging significant bonds with actual people. Yeah, introverted, sure, but this Gyro is sociopathic. He has no compassion for others, no sense of empathy. He doesn't want to better other people's lives because he thinks he should. He sees the betterment of other people's lives as a side effect of achieving recognition for his brilliance. It's very not Gyro. It's very weird to see that character who, in the original show, does everything he can because he wants to better the world, suddenly becomes somebody who doesn't like people at all. He seems to treat other people as inconveniences, as annoyances. His treatment of Fenton, Crackshell, Cabrera, Fenton Crackshell Cabrera, the new Gizmo Duck, is really bad. I don't like it at all. I don't like how Gyro just mistreats Fenton. And the fans just sort of like that, and it's weird. I can't really speak for all fans or anyone other than myself, but I find it really difficult to care about characters that I dislike. I mentioned earlier that the villains are also poorly represented. I don't like the new Mob Eagle. I think she's a disappointment when compared to her original version. The DuckTales 87 Mob Eagle was more of a mother than a mob boss, and that makes sense because she's Mob Eagle, after all, and that was a great part of her charm. She was a criminal, yes, but she was also soft and feminine and fun, like the Beagle Babes. This Mob Beagle isn't really fun. She's hard and cruel, and I just don't like her. I know we're supposed to be able to easily compare the two because the Mob Eagle in the original show did have her moments of just hardness where she was cruel and threatening, but she was still soft. And I don't like this new Mob Eagle because they try to make her soft and it fails so hard. I will admit I do kind of like the new Beagle Boys. I find it funny that there's so many different kinds now, that there are like these mini gangs of Beagle Boys. That was interesting. It doesn't help, though. It doesn't make up for the disappointment of who Mob Eagle is. Which is a shame, because Mob Eagle was actually one of my favorite villains in the original show. I do not like this Magica Dispel. She is also a disappointment when compared to her original version. And this, I know, may be sort of controversial because I know she's a completely different character in the comics. I am familiar with that. In the original DuckTales show, Magica had a clear motive for being evil. Well, evil, quote unquote. She needed Scrooge's #1 dime because she needed to make this counter curse to save her brother Poe, who had been transformed into her Raven familiar. I'm not entirely sure how the dime was going to help with that, but that's what she needed it for. In the comics, I believe, the reason Magica needs the #1 dime is because it's supposed to help her either obtain the Midas touch or find a way of harnessing the Midas touch, just a way to make it so that she can produce gold. And, you know, that's fine. The Magica in this new DuckTales doesn't really seem to have a clear motive for doing what she does. I feel like she's being depicted as a villain in the show because that's what we expect. Magica has always been a villain, and that's what we get to see. We get to see her being a villain, but it doesn't make any sense for her. She doesn't have anyone to save, and she doesn't seem to need treasure, because with her magic, it appears that she can just get whatever she wants or do whatever she wants, so it really doesn't make sense for her. She doesn't have a purpose. She doesn't have a point. I've found the introduction of Lena to be interesting, but pointless. I liked that Webby had this friend, but it was weird because Lena was also obviously so much older than Webby. and just giving her an older friend who is really just a plot device in the end because she's holding on to Magica's soul. It's weird. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and I just didn't appreciate it. One of the main things that I hated about the show was what they decided to do with Doofus Drake. It bothered me so much, and it still bothers me. I absolutely hate it. Doofus was a fun, silly, annoying sort of a sidekick character who was a good friend of the triplets. We even get to see that he and Webby someday get married in the original show, in a time-traveling episode where they go to the future. For some reason, the writers thought it'd be a great idea to take this fun, silly character and twist him into this super creepy, gross little villain. They took something that was harmless and good-natured and made it weird. Like, was it really necessary? Would it have been so hard to actually introduce a new friend for the boys? Someone their age to hang out with? I feel like what they did to Doofus is kind of like twisting Goofy into some sadistic scoundrel who poisons the neighborhood pets and leaves the corpses on, like, Pete's front stoop. It's weird, right? And the whole end of that particular episode also felt really weird. That whole episode felt weird. I can't say that Doofus was a favorite character, but I did kind of like him in the original show, and I hate this Doofus. I don't like what they did with Launchpad because he feels like a fraction of who the original Launchpad was. He feels so much less Launchpad. Especially when we first see him in the first episode, that whole obsession with being a pilot and continuing to remind Scrooge that he's a pilot. It was annoying. It was weird. I just feel like that's not what actual Launchpad would have done. And I know how that sounds, actual Launchpad. That sounds kind of silly. But I feel like the Launchpad we knew, and this was a character that had been around for years, all of a sudden became this kind of stupid, pathetic, pointless sort of character. He's just an idiot. I can't put that any other way. He's an idiot. And I guess that's supposed to be the joke? That he's dumb? It's not funny, and it makes me miss the original Launchpad. My second major complaint has to be the casting choices. I really like David Tennant. He is an impressive actor. He's not my favorite Doctor from Doctor Who. I do really love his depiction of Crowley from Good Omens. I just don't think that he can pull off Scrooge McDuck. I do have to give kudos to Disney for hiring an actual Scotsman to voice a Scottish character, but Mr. Tennant can't seem to get Scrooge's range right. He never sounds old enough. And I'm not sure if it's him or the script that makes him sound so derisive. I know there will never be a perfect replacement for Alan Young. Mr. Young virtually created the character of Scrooge McDuck when he first voiced him in Mickey's Christmas Carol. And I know that, so it's possible my ear keeps expecting to hear the right voice, and it's just jarring every time Scrooge speaks, and it's not that. It's the same with Catherine Tate voicing Magica. I love Catherine Tate. Her voice isn't right for the character. Magica really should have a thicker European accent, specifically something more Italian. And it's weird not hearing that. I don't know. I don't like a lot of the voice work. I find it odd how the triplets don't sound the same, but I am one of the few who kind of doesn't really like the fact that the triplets are so different in this show. One of the fun things about the original triplets was that they were, I guess you could say, interchangeable. Um, I believe they've used that as a plot device in the past where they could stand in for each other and no one would be the wiser. They can't really do that now. And I guess that's okay, and I guess that's more realistic. I just don't like it. Um, I do want to say, though, I really did enjoy the Darkwing Duck episode where we met Jim Starling and Drake Mallard and get the origin story of new Negaduck, who is voiced by Jim Cummings, who originally did Darkwing's voice in the actual Darkwing Duck show from the 90s. I kinda liked how the new team played with the voice actors like that. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, the basic gist is that in Ducktales 2017, we find out that Darkwing Duck was a television series rather than an actual superhero, and Jim Starling, voiced by Jim Cummings, played the original character in its original run. Drake Mallard is instead a younger fan of the show who becomes Darkwing Duck, and is voiced by Chris Diamantopoulos. Jim Starling is driven insane in that episode and becomes obsessed with thoughts of revenge on Drake Mallard for replacing him and for stealing his number one fan in Launchpad McQuack, and therefore becomes Negaduck to fight the new Darkwing. This is one of the only instances where the new show uses anyone who is in the older show, so I enjoyed the connection, but that's kind of all I liked about it. My third complaint, and probably my strongest complaint, is the blatant shallow fan service. It's obvious the new team on Ducktales 2017 are fans of the old show, as well as fans of the comics, which I thought would be great. I thought having little nods and references to the comics could be fun, but it instead feels cheap and almost clickbaity in the way Disney uses that content. I feel like the writers pulled out the life and times of Scrooge McDuck and just started bookmarking parts they liked or thought would be fun to portray, without considering how exactly any of that would fit in the narrative. Instead of placing the show in a timeline that would fit Scrooge's actual lifespan and line up reasonably with the specific points in time we see Scrooge live through, such as the 1883 eruption of Krakatoa, the writers made him effectively immortal. They made his parents immortal, probably so the nephews could meet them. They made Goldie O'Gilt a young and pretty thing because she found the Fountain of Youth. That was incredibly frustrating to watch. Pulling the immortal card is kind of like giving yourself an easy out when you know there's a possibility your overambitious and poorly researched writing backs you into a corner. It erases any threat to these characters, so the writers gave themselves carte blanche to do whatever they want to them and not worry about the consequences. Della has somehow survived over a decade on the moon by chewing Gyro's oxygen-making miracle gum. Yeah, she lost a leg, but she's alive, which means she's now gonna be a constant in the lives of the main cast. That's a huge deviation from the original show, or from the comics. Della was never a major character, but now she's there. So, now she's going to be an ever-present mother figure to the triplets. Something that might fall flat, given that she was never really a mother to begin with. She ditched her kids before they hatched, and we have no idea what her husband was doing, or where he was during the whole Spear of Selene debacle, so She's either going to be a lackluster mom, or she's going to take off again to find her next adventure. Knowing this show, she's probably offering to take her sons with her, particularly Dewey, but he'll refuse because he wants to be with his family. That's just the type of character she comes across as. Frank teases the fans. He's said that at some point in the show, he plans on having every single character you can think of in the Donald Duck and Scrooge comics either appear or be referenced. I also thought that could be neat, but he raises people's hopes when he says something like that. And he says someone special is going to be in the next episode, and then we get something like Donald's next door neighbor, a character nobody cares about. Who cares about the neighbor? Who asked specifically for that to be featured in an episode? It almost feels like a Disney Duck loot box situation. You know there are some big names that could show up. You know there are some characters that fans would love to see, and it would be so great. But there's a higher chance we'll be stuck with some low-tier, boring background character that only avid comic readers might even recognize. All of that aside, and I know this particular point is going to make me sound old and uncaring, but I don't feel like this reboot was necessary or wanted. There are so many other ideas that could have been turned into shows. We sort of have the three Caballeros, though those episodes aren't exactly easy to find. We could have had the Duck Avenger made into a series. They could have legitimately animated the entire life and times of Scrooge McDuck as a mini-series, and I guarantee there would be plenty of fans thrilled to have that. I feel like the only reason Disney greenlit this reboot was because they knew it would invariably be profitable. It's an older IP that resonates with a lot of older fans that now have their own disposable income to spend on Funko Pops, all while updating the universe to have riffs on things like Steve Jobs as Mark Beeks and kids being addicted to phone apps, so it would resonate with the younger crowd as well. I think their attempts at trying to relate to both the younger generation and the older generation is just coming across as insincere, and it's reaching, and I don't like it. I will admit, however, that I do enjoy Donald's presence in the show. We didn't really get Donald Duck in the original show. He was there for maybe a few episodes, but for the most part he was gone, which was the whole reason behind Huey, Dewey, and Louie being with Scrooge in the first place. Donald had been shipped off with the Navy, and the triplets needed somewhere to be. So we didn't get Donald in the original show, and now we have him, and honestly, he's the only thing that's really saving the show for me. It's fun watching him. I like how he's been incorporated. I like how they're actually showing him as this great adventurer. I even find some parts of the show to be very relatable, but I've always felt Donald Duck was more of a relatable character for me anyway. But, like in the episode where we meet the three Caballeros, they have high expectations for Donald because they remember him being really cool when he was with them. So they expect that he's been doing really cool things while they've been separate. And he has this minor freak out because he feels like he hasn't done anything with his life. And yeah, I felt that. I totally understand. I know that there are plenty of fans that enjoy this new show, they like the new takes on old characters and the twisting storyline, but I just don't feel the same. I'm largely disappointed with it, more with the team behind it, and now with the reveal that Daisy is gonna be introduced, I'm just turned off even more. Of all the things DuckTales never really needed, a sad and abusive romantic relationship is pretty high on that list. So, for me, I'm not really a big fan of this show. I can, however, highly recommend Mickey and the Roadster Racers. It's a lot more fun. With that, I think that's all I have to say on this particular subject. Let me know if I missed anything. Go ahead and leave any messages.